Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Caitanya Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Chatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasani Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyas Kripa Sindhuga Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Yes, so devotees, first of all I must just switch off my speaker in Zoom. And you can hear me all right in Zoom, isn't it? Who knows? I don't know. Anyway, I guess you have to. So there we go. Yes, and here we are now. Last night, as we said, we read the first 7 verses. First of all, the list, all the questions. What are, let's just go through it again. What is Prakriti? Means the material nature. What is the Purusha? Means in this context, the enjoyer. Then Kshetra. What is the field of activities? Which was one of the things we focused on last night. Basically means the body or the conditioned state, really, of the living entity. A combination of 3 things. Just the gross external body, the living symptoms which are manifest in the body, and then the subtle body. Those are the field of activities, I mean, in simple terms. Then number 4 is Kshetragya, the knower of the field. Who knows the body or the conditioned state? Could we say the conditioned condition of the conditioned soul? Yeah. Who knows that? And we heard that 2 people know the conditioned state of the living entity. One is the soul, as distinct, of course, from the body, the gross body, and the subtle body, and the life symptoms which are manifest. So the soul, the actual living entity, and the supersoul. Supersoul. There was some discussion of that last night. And then number 5 is jnana, knowledge. But not simply knowledge in the sense of being some sort of set of facts and figures, that type of thing. But knowledge which includes necessarily the process by which knowledge comes. Not separating out the process for acquiring knowledge from the actual information, you could say, the actual knowledge which is then gathered. And then 6, Gyayam, the object of knowledge. Okay. Yeah, so that's the list from verse 1. And then we went on from verse 2 to verse 7 to discuss 3 and 4, and to some degree 5. 3 and 4, again, the field of activities, the conditioned state of the living entity, gross and subtle body, and the symptoms of life. and Kshetragya, the knower of the field, the soul and super soul, and then something about knowledge and the process, a little bit, not so much, but something was there. Something was there in that regard. Right, so that we went through, and, I accept, I know, there were some complexities there, like in, what was it? In the 5th verse, the 5 types of realization, the 5 types of realization, Annamaya, basically the gross body, or strictly speaking, Anna meaning food, how there is dependence on food for existence. That's a realization of, you could say, a higher truth, because without that, your body could be as strong as you like, but with no food, the end will be nigh. The end will come soon. Then pranamaya. Next is just appreciating the living symptoms. Yeah. Not yet the presence of the soul, but just that there is life. Then jnanamaya, thinking, feeling, and willing, the subtle body. Then number 4, vijnanamaya, realization of Brahman, or the spiritual nature of the living entities. Not just that there is life, but the actual spiritual nature. And then anandamaya, which is ultimately realization of the Supreme Lord, the realization of the all blissful nature. And then verses 6 and 7, it got complicated, didn't it? The 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, 10 senses and the mind, 5 sense objects, then desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms and convictions. This in verses 6 and 7, this was a detailed analysis of the field, the gross and subtle bodies and all the various components. And not only that, but the interactions also. That was desire, hatred, happiness, distress. Those come under the headings of the interactions of the field. So that we went through, I hope you did write out, the different component features as were described there by Srila Prabhupada. It's very worthwhile doing. Yes, okay, so now we go on to the next section, which is verses 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which are all together. Those verses have been put together by Srila Prabhupada. So that's a section, and it is Krishna's more detailed, you could say, analysis of 5. Knowledge, jnana, knowledge, and the process. Actually, it's very interesting. It's just very interesting indeed. What Krishna considers to be knowledge and what Krishna considers to be the process of knowledge. Maybe some things will be very unexpected for us. That this is part of the process of knowledge. Anyway, we will look at it right now. Yes, so in a sort of a nutshell, or in essence, something like that, you could say, the process by which the knower of the field, in this case the soul, the knower of the gross and subtle bodies and the life symptoms within them, so the process by which the knower transcends the limitations of the field, because the soul, as the knower, the soul is on a higher level, the eternal, conscious, living entity, pure spirit soul, the eternal servant of Krishna, as compared to the gross and subtle material bodies and just whatever life is there within them. The gross body particularly is temporary. So therefore the knower, the soul, is higher than the field which is known. So therefore the process, it's the process by which the soul transcends the limitations of the field. This is the process of knowledge. It's not, well, we said it's not simply information for the sake of information, but it involves a process which culminates in liberation of one sort or another. So as we'll see, we'll read about it, of course, starting in a minute. The process, the actual process for acquiring knowledge, developing knowledge, it begins with humility. Who would have thought that humility is the first thing, first necessity in terms of developing knowledge? Who would have thought? Not so many people. Obviously, at least devotees, maybe not the materialists so much, but definitely the devotees know that humility is a very important quality, recommended or even insisted upon by Lord Chaitanya. Trinadapi Sunichena, Tarorapi Sahishnana, Manina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. We all know this verse, third verse of Shikshastakam. Such an important quality, and such a wonderful quality. But actually, in terms of what we're going to discuss just now, it is the first step as far as becoming able to acquire knowledge is concerned. It's the first step in the process of knowledge. So the different items, well, we're going to read them all just now, and then we're going to go through. Prabhupada gives a big purport in which he elaborates on maybe all of them, at least a fair number, maybe all of them. And two are particularly important, as we'll see just now. Taking shelter of the spiritual, bona fide spiritual master, and practicing unalloyed devotional service. They are like that, the foundation, everything hinges on them. But we'll also see that some of these qualities are relevant not just to devotees, but also to impersonalists. Generally, they're all basically relevant to devotees, But some have a broader application also, because Krishna is not really so much emphasizing pure devotional service as he was doing, as we saw last week. A couple of weeks ago. Okay, so here we go, devotees. Verses 8 to 12. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth and death, of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge. And besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. Hare Krishna. That's powerful, isn't it? That's just really powerful. Okay, so let's have a look at the purport here. Here's a little, let me give you a little summary perhaps, before we go into detail. We'll go into detail. But yeah, a little summary first of all of these. So we have here, if you count them, you'll see we have 20 qualities. We have 20, basically. Now, the first 15 can be applied to both devotees and impersonalists, jnanis. The first 15. Then, the 16th quality, constant and unalloyed devotion to the Lord, is for the devotees, completely for the devotees. Then 17 and 18 are good for the jnanis and devotees. And what 17 and 18 mean? It means aspiring to live in a solitary place. For devotees, that's good. For jnanis, that's good. Impersonalists. And what was it? Aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people. That's 17 and 18. So that detachment, we saw in earlier chapters how Lord Krishna was emphasizing in different places detachment, which of course Prabhupada, the way he was presenting things, he would pretty much always, at least generally, bring back to Krishna consciousness. But in a very literal sense, in a number of verses, that concept of detachment was being applied to other types of yogis also, Sankhya yogis. What are they called? Sat Chakra yogis, I think, something like that. Yeah, different types of yogis and the jnanis. Of course, Prabhupada always And it is the underlying theme always in Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada was always bringing it back to Krishna consciousness. A devotee asked Prabhupada once that, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes we read in your translation of a verse, in Bhagavatam, for example, in your translation, the word Krishna is there. But when we look at the Sanskrit in detail, the word Krishna is not there. So, there was a little perplexity in the mind of the devotee. And Prabhupada answered, yes, that is my expertise. So Prabhupada was able to see Krishna everywhere and put him there when it was most appropriate. And then the last two, 19 and 20, they're mainly for jnanis. There can be application in Krishna consciousness, but on the surface they apply more for jnanis, and they were the last two, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. Yeah, and this is really, we read last night, we did read, that these verses are presenting the process of liberation. The process of liberation. All right, so now we've read those verses, 5 verses together. Let's go through, because these are important qualities which we must appreciate, and appreciate the value of, and we must try to cultivate. Oftentimes we talk about, and it's definitely a fact, that we don't make like real extraneous endeavors outside the process of Krishna consciousness to cultivate just certain good qualities. Like Prabhupada talks about being vegetarian. There are many vegetarian societies, and people join them to sort of learn about becoming a vegetarian and to get help becoming vegetarian and like that. But when you become Krishna conscious, you naturally become vegetarian. If you're becoming Krishna conscious, apparently, or if you're meant to be, but you're not vegetarian, something's really wrong, because it's part and parcel, inseparable from Krishna consciousness ultimately. Yeah, so these qualities are important. Prabhupada makes the point in the first paragraph. Prabhupada makes the point that some people, at the end of the first paragraph, end of the second paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that, right at the end of the second paragraph, as for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. We must look at ourselves from time to time as we're moving along the path of Krishna consciousness. We must look at ourselves from time to time and just do a little check. How am I doing? Yeah. And to whatever degree these qualities are appearing or developing or not developing, these are all indications of the degree of progress or lack of, like this sort of idea. All right, so now let's just have a look here. Yes, so Srila Prabhupada does make the point in the first paragraph. Let's have a look at the first paragraph. So this is the real process of knowledge, because it involves refining your life. It's not simply academic, facts and figures, but it involves refining your life and bringing your life to a higher level, ultimately a Krishna conscious level. If you refine just your brain, and particularly just in some particular field, like maybe you become a scientist or a lawyer or some language specialist or engineer, all these things, you may become highly knowledgeable in these types of things, and thereby you may get money. But what does it do for the quality of your life? What does it do for the quality of you as a person? Do you actually become a better person? Do you become a person who is approaching the state of perfection? That's a different thing. It's a real different thing. So Prabhupada makes the point in sort of the middle of the paragraph. Let's have a look. Yeah, it is almost the middle of the paragraph. Srila Prabhupada says, of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Maicha nanya yogena bhaktir avya bicharani. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. Sri Sri Radha Radhanath Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. How's that for a strong statement? Let me read it again. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items in the list, because there's 20, so the other 19 are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. And Prabhupada refers to famous verse, Bhagavatam 5:18-12. Yes, yasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvarganais tatra samasate sura. Yeah. And it's basically saying like that anyone who's rendering devotional service, bhaktir bhagavat, devotional service to the Lord, develops all the good qualities of the demigods. Those who are not rendering devotional service, they're just in their minds, just in their heads, on the mental platform. And then Prabhupada goes on a little further, just another sentence or two down. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. Supreme Personality of Godhead Sri Krishna clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. Whoa, Haribol. It's such a strong statement, but such a wonderful statement. So then, beginning with the second paragraph, Srila Prabhupada goes into an analysis of all, or the majority, I think all, but at least the majority of these particular items, which are the process. They're all component parts in a process for getting knowledge. And what is the first one? Humility. Now you can, I think, understand how some people, we mentioned actually, would just have a hard time. They'd have a hard time accepting that being humble is part of a process of knowledge. You know, it's one thing for it to be a process, or part of a process for becoming a sort of like a pleasant person, or something along those lines. But in regard to knowledge, what does it mean? Well, let me give you a hint, an idea of what it means. And this principle applies in different ways to many of the other points, or even all of them, actually. So humility, as part of the process of knowledge, acquiring knowledge. Ultimately, that knowledge, the ultimate form of that knowledge, is to understand the Supreme Lord and our relationship with Him as His servants. Now, if you are not humble, you cannot understand the Supreme Lord. You cannot accept the Supreme Lord as existing even, generally. What to speak of developing a relationship with Him, coming to know Him like that and appreciate Him in so many ways. So that humility to come before the Lord and submit oneself as His servant and pray for His mercy, this is a very important part of coming to a point where one will be able to understand the Lord, or in other words, start to develop real knowledge of life. Because that real knowledge of life has to be in relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes, so as someone said, was it in the famous Faust, I think it's an opera, Wagner, is it? Better to be a king in hell than servant in heaven. Something, words to that effect, than a slave in heaven. The devotees would love to be slaves of Krishna, just to get the opportunity to do any service, any time, and just drown in the ocean of service. But humility is needed for that. Without that humility, the puffed up people, they say, "Where is God? Show me God." As if if we can't pull Him out of our pocket, then and say there He is, then that's like they're justified in saying He doesn't exist. So there's a lot that can be said about this. But I think you get the basic idea how humility is actually an essential part, according to Lord Krishna here, the first step, the first part in the process of developing real knowledge, which culminates in liberation and entering one's relationship with the Lord. So Prabhupada, he gives a simple definition here. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. There, it's just a little nutshell idea. What is humility, or a particular, it's like a perspective on humility. And Prabhupada makes the point here that in material existence, that Prabhupada says the material conception of life, it makes us, it pushes us, it makes us eager to be honored. Yes. But from the point of view of a person who is in real knowledge, perfect knowledge of the soul and the relationship with the Lord, Prabhupada says, such a person who knows that he or she is not this body, that for them anything, honor or dishonor, in regard to the body, is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. How's that? That's pretty amazing, isn't it? That's pretty amazing. Yeah, and Prabhupada goes on, people want to become famous for their religion. How about becoming famous for your humility? So next paragraph, non-violence. Generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body, but actually non-violence means not to put others into distress. Now that's a very nice definition. Yeah. People, and Prabhupada elaborates on that, people are trapped in ignorance in just day-to-day material life. In this way they're suffering in many ways. And Prabhupada says, unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. If you don't help people to develop this knowledge, you're being violent to them. So therefore, real non-violence must include not just not killing the animals, that sort of thing, but real non-violence must include giving people Krishna consciousness. Then next Prabhupada looks at tolerance. And again, a simple definition. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. You know, particularly if you're preaching Krishna consciousness, I mean to the public. It's one thing for someone like me to be sitting here in this temple, such a nice spiritual place, and, you know, physically a very protected environment. But it's a different thing to go out into the streets and just confront the people. Here, take Krishna consciousness. It's a very helpful thing for developing humility, actually. We strongly recommend that you go out distributing books if you want to develop humility. Because, and I can speak from experience, you go out into the streets doing book distribution, and it's almost, if you stay out like for the whole day, like 5, 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever, it's almost inevitable you'll meet at least one person who insults you or tries to grab a book and run away with it. Krishna, all these types of things. Yeah, so that really teaches tolerance. Otherwise, if you can't be tolerant, you'll get so frustrated out there. How can they treat me like this? And Prabhupada in the purport gives the example of Prahlad, who had to tolerate the extreme abuse of his father. We all know that story. But Prahlad tolerated. Like Haridas Thakur was whipped in 22 marketplaces, but he tolerated. So, and I've had so much experience, even friends of mine, close, when I first became a devotee, the very day I shaved my head and all that, then one of my close friends came to visit me, and he was just fried with me. Oh my gosh. And our friendship just ended on the spot. Sure. Yeah, it's hard, you know. We have to become tolerant. Then next, Prabhupada discusses simplicity. And again, a simple type of definition. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he could disclose the real truth even to an enemy. That's all Prabhupada says about simplicity. Yeah. Not being two-faced, being honest. Then Prabhupada talks about acceptance of the spiritual master. It's essential, because without that instruction, one cannot progress in Krishna consciousness. So one should approach the spiritual master very humbly and offer all services so that the spiritual master will be pleased to bless the disciple. And with those blessings, progress will be there. And without the blessings, then one's life will be empty. It'll just be empty, and one will feel the emptiness. Yes, so then next one is cleanliness, essential for making advancement. Prabhupada here in the purport talks of two types of cleanliness. External, bathing the body, and internal cleanliness means thinking of Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna particularly. Of course, it includes reading Prabhupada's books, discussing Krishna consciousness. But particularly, thinking of Krishna, chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada recommends here. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Then next is steadiness. And again, an in a nutshell type of definition, steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. And Prabhupada says, without that determination, one cannot make tangible progress. So the thing is, sometimes Krishna puts pressure on us to get focused, get ourselves together in Krishna consciousness, or else there's going to be trouble. And when we feel that pressure, we might think, oh, it's pressure, it's not nice. But it's Krishna's mercy. He's prompting us, get more serious. In other words, he's saying, get more nectar. That's ultimately what it means. That comes from steadiness, and which comes from Yeah. Determination to make progress. Then, also in this same paragraph, self-control. Self-control. Prabhupada says self-control means, same paragraph, right by the beginning. Self-control means one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. One should become accustomed to this, used. It should become like a habit, a focus in life, that one just spontaneously accepts things useful for Krishna consciousness, rejects things which are not. Yeah. So, and then of course renunciation, real renunciation. Prabhupada talks fairly extensively here about how the senses, how we got to control the senses. Real renunciation means, real sense control means to become accustomed to doing Krishna conscious things and avoiding doing non-Krishna conscious things. Don't cater to the demands of the senses and the mind. Then, let's say, real renunciation. Then false ego. False ego, Prabhupada says, next paragraph. False ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he's not his body and his spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. You know, we use this word ego. Generally it's used in a negative way, even in ordinary material life. Ego, literally, the word is a Latin word. It means I am. Or, so it indicates a sense of identity. What am I? I am a man. Well, no, I'm not. I'm pure spirit soul. So I am a man. That's false. That's part of false ego. I'm a big man, a small man, whatever, some type of man, a white man. It's all part of the illusion of false ego. But I'm the eternal servant of Krishna. This is real ego, real identity, and that is what we want. Then, next paragraph, we should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. As soon as you're born, you're dying. As soon as you're born, you're dying. Everything in between is just an interlude. In the meantime, it's not really something of real substance. Yeah. So there's so much distress. Prabhupada dedicates this paragraph to talking about that, how there's a chapter in the Bhagavatam which describes the situation, the predicament of the child in the womb of the mother. Oh, it's horrible. It's terrible. And then what to speak of old age and finally the process of dying? It's shocking. So it's like that. And therefore, well, the Sanskrit, if we just look at the Sanskrit, let me just refer to the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit says, it is verse 9, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, that means birth, death, old age, disease. Dukkha dosh anudarshanam. Dukh, of course, means misery. Dosh means fault. Something is faulty, something is wrong. And anudarshanam means having a darshan of these things. We like having darshan of the deities. But to have darshan of birth, death, old age, and disease, that's a bad darshan. But that's what people in material life are getting. Okay, let's see now. So then next Prabhupada elaborates on, as for detachment for children, wife and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they're not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. So the best process for making the home pleasant, for householders, at least a family, is if the whole home and all the members of the family can be fully Krishna conscious. And how to do that? Well, of course, these things we're very familiar with. Prabhupada saying, chant Hare Krishna, take prasadam, read the books. In other words, don't sit at home watching TV. Have a Krishna conscious program in the evening. Have some discussion about Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. Do deity worship, etc., etc. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together. If one molds his family life in this way, following the regulative principles, then there's no need to give up family life. Yeah. So like this. Well, let's see how much more there is to go through. Happiness and distress, that's the next paragraph. We have to tolerate, not just distress. It's one thing to try to tolerate distress. It's another thing tolerating material happiness, that we don't really want material happiness. Yeah. But we should see these things from the spiritual perspective. And if material happiness is going to distract us from Krishna consciousness, then no thank you. And then in the same paragraph, towards the end of the paragraph which begins happiness and distress, towards the end of the paragraph, Prabhupada says, devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service. Yeah. Chanting, hearing, worshipping, etc., etc. And then next is associating, not associating with materialistic people. Yeah. Prabhupada's not really discussing all of them, but important ones. So for a devotee, for one who's really absorbed in Krishna consciousness, associating with non-devotees, well, it's like uncomfortable. How to relate to them, how to talk about the stuff they talk about. They don't want to hear about Krishna. Oh, Krishna. Yeah, so birds of a feather flock together. Yeah. Then, next paragraph, the importance of self-realization, of course, very important. And the second to last paragraph, really trying to understand the absolute truth sincerely. Because if you actually understand the absolute truth, you'll take to devotional service. And the last paragraph is just a little summary. Prabhupada, let me just read a bit of it. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the supreme truth, the absolute personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on the staircase, there's so many people who've reached the first floor, the second floor, or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. Or in other words, as Prabhupada said at the beginning, in the first paragraph, that without bhakti, all these qualities are useless. Yes. Okay, devotees, there you go. We will carry on tomorrow night with the next section, which is from verse 13 to verse 19. It's getting a little more subtle in certain respects, but it's very interesting. So, Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.